My name is Eddie Spelia, and on today's episode of Cropper Talk, we're going to be talking about corn. Now, when I say corn, I don't mean the band behind the 1998 nu metal classic Follow the Leader corn. I mean the corn that is a omnipresent factor in almost all American life and has been for many years. I mean the corn that makes up this corncob pipe. I mean the corn that goes into the 51% or more of bourbon whiskeys produced all throughout these United States of America. But most specifically, I want to talk about Eleanor, a bourbon whiskey featuring loads and loads of that corny goodness. Now, Eleanor is a bourbon whiskey. It's not a Kentucky bourbon, as you might assume. It is a whiskey that was originally produced and distilled by MGP, a giant corporation based out of Indiana, which is a discussion for another day, but they do really good work. Now, what I find really interesting about Crowded Barrel, the company that released Eleanor, is that they are, in their words, the first crowdsourced whiskey distillery. Now, cards on the table, I am acquainted with a good deal of people related with the distillery and the Texas Whiskey Trail in general. Big fan of what they do. Now, what's the proof on this bad boy? All of the Eleanors are presented at cask strength proof, which for those of you in the audience unfamiliar with whiskey, it means that from the barrel to the bottle, they do not add water. That's effectively it. This particular release, because I'm not sure if you can tell in the audience, but each barrel of whiskey will develop a different flavor profile, even if it's being aged in the same warehouse, made by the same distillery, on the same day of the same mash bill. Can result in completely different flavor profiles. Such is the case with this particular release from every single other release of Eleanor that I have thus tried to this date. This particular release is bottled at 57.5% alcohol. Little hefty, not the heftiest thing I've personally ever tried, but for some people who are only familiar with even just Fireball, this might be overwhelming. For the nerds in the audience, 57.5% alcohol renders 115 proof. This particular release is Chapter 5. I have this whiskey sitting here, and I've let it begin to aerate as we've been discussing. In terms of the other Eleanors that I've had, particularly the Chapter 1 release, and I think the Chapter 4, can't quite remember. But in terms of the two previous Eleanors that I distinctly remember having, there may be more that I don't quite remember, but in terms of the ones that I do, the nose is just, in this case, unremarkable. The other two really jumped out of the glass, particularly the Chapter 1, the 1856, I believe, had this real heft of honey butter just punching you in the face. With this particular whiskey, it's very much dry and almost not quite in the realm of the 5-spice blend that is present in, I believe, Chinese cuisine. Freshly toasted and ground spices, but it's a very light kind of nose. as light as a cask strength whiskey could be, but still. It almost smells like just kind of something rusted. Flavor-wise, this is an interesting release. There's a very obvious kind of dryness to it, but even still, there are flavors in the whiskey that just kind of exist on the higher ends and lower ends, but neither are particularly bombastic. It's just kind of like an emanating kind of radiation of flavor, like that just kind of spreads throughout the tongue, just kind of floating, and sunlight just kind of going through it. Just that kind of arid ambiance. Speaking of arid ambiance, this whiskey, I would say, tastes like driving through the Texas hill country at dusk feels, at least in my experience. Sweet-ish, almost root, just kind of type of like a tea, but I'm trying to place it almost like a gunpowder tea. I'm forgetting if that's black or green tea, but just a hefty tea. I got it almost just and then vanished. There's enough bitter to counterbalance the sweetness, but there's enough sweetness to counterbalance the bitterness, and neither of them are particularly outlandish and bold. Being a cask strength whiskey that was aged for a good deal of time in Texas, it's not inoffensive, but for a whiskey that was aged in Texas and is undiluted from the barrel, it's fairly inoffensive for what it is. Not in a bad way, just not in a truly bombastic way, but speaking entirely out of my depth, if this was D&D, its strength would be 1. Not quite 1, but I hope you can understand the point. As I've let this sit, a kind of almost buttered toast kind of smell is approaching in the nose. A little bit of a honey is developing flavor-wise as well. This lingering finish is almost like a trying to figure out how to describe this without it sounding disgusting. Dried out or dehydrated creamed corn. So creamed corn that you then put in a dehydrator and not necessarily eat, but then you take it out and just kind of extract that smell and just spritz it all around. Maybe just because you need to be fresh and corny for that special somebody later. But truly, the big thing that shines through on this whiskey is just kind of the dust. In the words of the official tasting notes of NASCAR, they claim to get a very mild caramel, which I don't dispute because flavor is subjective, and I do get a very mild caramel, but it is very mild. Very, very mild. So much to the point where I didn't really bring it up at all during this review, because it's just kind of not there, to the point where I'm almost questioning, is it the power of suggestion? It's a really enjoyable bourbon. Simple, yes. Bold, also yes. Is it something you can get your hands on? No, probably not. I believe they're sold out of all of the barrels of this, and it's nigh impossible to get your hands on most of the things that Crowded Barrel releases at this point in time. Hopefully that changes. There's a lot of things that MGP are responsible for on the market. I believe brands like Old Elk, Bullet that I had mentioned, Belle Meade, really solid brands that put out really good products, also sourced from the same place. Is it going to give you the same experience as this particular whiskey? No, but, either wait until you can find something like what's to your liking, or do what I like to do, which is just kind of blend together various things until you get the flavor you want. I've been Jeffrey Petrone. This has been another whiskey review that has gone on way too long. Have a great day. On today's episode, for delusion to thrive, other, more rational ideas must be rejected, destroyed. Only that can the delusion must not full-blown